Good afternoon. Welcome to the NIRSA Event Services webinar. I'm Mary Callender, and I've worked with most of you already in planning your 2017 regional conferences, so some of the information shared today will be old news. Those that are planning for 2018, this may be the first you hear of it, so I want to remind you that I'm always available for questions if something I talk about today doesn't make sense. In the past, this session was at the annual conference, so regions could get an earlier start in planning their fall events. But with the February conference and some event service pricing discussions, we changed it to a webinar, and we hope this format works for you. Let me warn you now that talking for 30 to 45 minutes without seeing you or your reactions is difficult, and I apologize up front if I go too fast or too slow. For the webinar format today, you can hear me as a presenter, but I can't hear you. We will be doing questions, and you can type the questions and send them using the questions box on your dashboard. I will save time at the end of each slide and section to see if there's any questions about what I just covered. And we are recording the webinar today, and we'll have access to it. Access to it will be shared at a later date once we make sure it's able to be shared. The agenda for today will be a review of the resources we have on the NIRSA website for planning your regional conference, a review of NIRSA event services and what those services include, and then a wrap up with what the next steps are. So to begin, for resources. As an event host, you may have resources to gather information. The best place to get resources is from whoever hosted the event the previous year. Hopefully, most of you have received some sort of event summary or sharing of the information from last year's conference host. NIRSA headquarters can also provide you with data. I generally have previous year's budgets, both what the proposed budgets were and the final budgets were, event registration forms with pricing data, final attendance numbers, hotel contracts, and if I don't already have it, I can usually track down the hotel room night pickup from previous years to help with your contracting of your future event. Your regional leadership team, your regional rep, is a great resource when developing your budget and site selection. I encourage you to reach out to them in your planning so that they know what's going on. I also need to get their support for all of these things that we are working on. And I often share dates and locations of other regionals or NIRSA events with them, so they can help you identify dates that don't conflict with other NIRSA events. On the NIRSA website, there's a number of resources for event organizers. And for the navigation, so you know, if you start out on the Grow tab and then go to Regional Events and then Resources for Event Organizers, this is how you get to where we are right now. And on this page, there's a number of things. There's general information with what NIRSA policies are that you all need to make sure that you're following. It's good to review these. I'm not going to click through everything, but most of the policies make common sense. You aren't going to have a sponsor that's alcohol, tobacco, credit card, firearm related. You aren't supposed to spend association or member money on alcohol. Sometimes this gets a little tricky when you have a sponsor that wants to host a social with an open bar, so I'll have to work with you on how we go about doing that, but I can't sign any contracts for an open bar. It has to be a cash bar. So there's just little intricacies with a lot of these things that you'll need to be aware of. So I encourage you to read through these policies to familiarize yourself with them. The planning guide and worksheets. This is helpful both at the state and provincial level and the regional level. A lot of the information is geared more at the local level, so the scalability of the timelines and what's asked, the forms might be a little different, but they're good resources to look at to see what kinds of things you need to make sure that you are covering. The guides and worksheets found in this section may be helpful to go back to after today and refamiliarize yourself with them, because I may be referencing them here and there. And as we go through the planning and implementation of your event, I will share additional forms with you that aren't on the website. We will later on today be going through continuing education units, so here's where the links are. We'll cover that in a little bit. And then also we have materials ordering. Many of your events, you may want to order badge holders or the inserts that go in the badge holders, ribbons. You may want to order loaner banners. All of these things are on this website. You'll pay for what it is that you buy, and we will bill it to your regional budget. And I have a different format that we do to order those, but you can go through this website to find what kinds of things you can order for your event. Next, I will be reviewing event services that are available to you as a regional host. We are still finalizing a new pricing model with the member network for all of these bundled services, with the goal of not having a significant impact on your current approved budget. So I'll go through what those resources are in a minute. Are there any questions so far? Doesn't look. Okay. The first step in planning your event after you have chosen a city is to contract with the hotel and or meeting space and build your conference budget. As a means to reduce financial and liability risk to you as a conference host and to NIRSA, we require that headquarters review and sign and approve these two things. This is what we do every day as an association, and if you're only planning an event once every 3 or 4 years, you may not be familiar with what you should be looking for in a contract that these hotels might send you. And just so you know, what the kinds of things that I look for are mutual protection for the hotel and NIRSA. Initially, when contracts come from the hotel, they're very one-sided, protecting the hotel all the way through the contract. So we just ask in certain clauses that say both parties are protected in this clause. They're usually really good about making not almost any change, but a lot of the changes that you ask. I look at the room rate as compared to previous year's locations. Peak night is a term used for the maximum number of rooms you have on your biggest night, and so I compare your room block schedule with your event schedule to make sure that it looks like you have the right amount of rooms that match up with your schedule. I look at the attrition clause in a contract. This clause makes you responsible as an event host for the number of rooms that aren't used, so we want to make sure that percentage is pretty low. Hotels often start out at a 90% attrition clause, and in general, NIRSA asks for 80% or lower, and most of the times they grant that, and what that does is it lowers the amount of rooms you might be responsible for if you don't have as many people come to the conference as you had originally planned. Another thing in a contract that gets real tricky is the food and beverage minimum. This can really get an event into trouble if you don't understand the fine print. In your contract, you might see that you have a catering requirement of, for example, $20,000, and you plan to offer 2 or 3 meals, and you've looked at the catering menus and think that you can do that. Often this requirement that's in the contract doesn't include what we call plus, which is the tax and the service that get attached to the food and beverage costs. So this adds an additional almost $6,000. Usually tax is 8 to 10%, and a service fee is 18 to 20%. So that can add 30% to your food and beverage costs. So I want to make sure you are accounting for all of this in your budget, and that you understand you are responsible. If you decide you don't have enough people coming to the conference and you want to eliminate a meal, and you have a $30,000 food and beverage and you drop to $25,000 of what you spent, you still have to pay an additional $5,000 whether you have that meal or not. So you need to know ahead of time what your plan is and what you're agreeing to contractually. Most hotels don't charge for meeting space, and if you have a certain number of room nights and catering costs, so I make sure that the meeting space is complimentary. And you also want to ask for complimentary internet in your meeting space. With so many of the events using guidebook and the presenters needing access to the internet, they'll often say, oh yes, you have internet in your sleeping rooms, but you also need it in your meeting space. and we ask for it complimentary. Sometimes they agree to it, sometimes they give you a 50% discount, and we just need to look at all that as it compares to your budget. First conversations seem out of reach, and as you negotiate, you find out what you can get, many things that you weren't really aware of. When you initiate contracts with hotels, please make sure that they know that the national office needs to review and sign the contract. Some hotels may think you are the first signatory or you are the final signatory, and once you agree on terms, it's good to go, and they get a little frustrated when they find out there is another level to review and negotiate. So just make sure they understand what your role is and that there's another entity that needs to review and sign the contract. Regarding your budget, those of you planning for 2017, I sent you a template. Those for 2018, I'll do the same in the next upcoming months, or you can reach out to me. But mostly I look to make sure that you have accounted for contractual items like we talked about earlier, that your food and beverage minimum and the tax and service fee are in your budget, that your catering meeting space rental, transportation, things that you have contractual obligations are included in your budget. I look at your proposed attendees and pricing and numbers and compare it to previous years, and I try to make sure you have accounted for standard items. And a budget, just like in your job or at home, is a guide, and as you save money here and there, you may need to increase some other line item, and that's okay to do. I just ask that you submit a revised budget if there's a substantial increase in anticipated income or expenses that you didn't originally anticipate. Are there any questions on contracts or budgets at this point in time? All right, we'll keep going, and you can ask questions later if you find that something comes up later on. So here are all the services that headquarters provides you that you can, so that you can focus on your event. Our presentation proposal process, we can use what's our abstract manager that we use for our conference right now. It allows for the solicitation of presentations, the review and acceptance of those presentations, downloading all that data to put in a app or to print off for your program. HQ will create your form based on a set criteria and then provide access and training for your program committee to manage the process and export data. So for example, on this form, all these forms show up. You can see right here was the 2015 Region 6 conference, 2018 NIRSA conference. So you will create a form and it will be called the 2017 Region 2 conference, and that's where everything will be built out. For example, it'll start with the template of the conference, and as you work with headquarters, we'll include certain things and not things, but that it follows the same format. So members that submit presentation proposals for regions or for the conference or for institutes, all are using the same format and same system. This way too then, like I said, your program committee can manage the process through reviews and selection and notifying people that way. So this is a service that you are able to have access to. When you're doing that, you want to make sure that your ed sessions meet your CEU credits. And this, so that you want to know where it can be found, is under the Grow tab, under Professional Registry, and under Continuing Education Credits. That's where you'll find this information. I've already had a few questions on, what does it take to be CEU eligible, and you need to make sure that you're asking for the core competencies, that you're asking for learning objectives for the ed session, and that each block of time is an hour to qualify for 0.1 CEU. There's some regions that have 50-minute or 45-minute blocks, and that's okay, but they won't be eligible for CEU credits. So if you can, we would encourage you to block your ed sessions in 60-minute increments so that they qualify for CEU credits. Once you get to the point of deciding on your ed sessions, your program committee will send them to headquarters, Kristen Gleason, who's the Director of Professional Development, will review them to make sure that they have met these qualifications, and then we'll assign CEUs to those ed sessions so that you can then put your program on your website and on Guidebook with the CEUs that match up with it. Website. This is a, oh wait, logo review. Sorry, I was skipping ahead. If the word NIRSA or the NIRSA icon is used in your event logo, the headquarters creative department needs to review and approve and make sure the NIRSA logo brand is being used in its official form. For example, this is the Region 2 logo for their 2017 event. And originally when they sent it, and I sent it on to creative, I thought it looked fine, and I got a email back from our creative director saying that the little guy was distorted. He was just a little off kilter. And I, of course, couldn't see the difference. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you even know that? And he said, knowing the NIRSA logo I created is distorted would be like you being able to recognize your kids in a crowd. He just knows if there's something not quite right with the logo, or it's being used and stretched in a way that's not acceptable to the NIRSA brand. So if you're using the word NIRSA or the NIRSA icon in your regional logo, make sure that we see it first before you start using it in your marketing materials. Website. This is something new this year that we're offering to regional conferences. Your regional representatives will be trained on updating your regional website and all the things that can be available on there. So hosts will need to work with them to create and upload content for your regional conferences following the template that has been created. This is the template right now, and we have Region 6, so every region will have the same template. It'll have your region up there, it'll have the same bars across the top. You will put your logo and kind of the dates and information, and then your drop downs will be here on the left. That this is where you then create your content that you will put on these pages. Again, you will work with your regional rep to populate this information, but our hope is that members will have a consistent experience from year to year, going from if the region's being hosted in Alabama one year and Florida the next year, and it's a different school with different resources, the support is always going to be the same and the experience will be the same. So we hope that you find this service helpful in planning your event. It's also helpful for our associate members who are often asking, you know, where the events are, where's the information, and they have to click through to different institutions that are hosting the sites. So having all of this on the NIRSA website will be very beneficial to members and associates. Liability insurance is something that is covered under NIRSA's umbrella policy for our regional educational events and conferences. It covers all the basics of your conference, the educational events, fun runs, golf tournaments, facility tours, socials. It's an umbrella policy that covers that. However, if you have some high-risk events, one year someone wanted something, they were at an aquarium and they wanted to swim with the sharks, or if you're having a hot air balloon rides, those are considered a little bit more high risk, and there may be a rider attached to that insurance policy that you may have to pay additional monies for. So if you're doing anything out of the norm that's a little more high risk, make sure you check and we can follow through on that before you finalize that part of your event. Guidebook is, if many of you have been to conference, is the app that you can put your program and lots of things on. We have negotiated a bundled pricing with Guidebook that allows events to offer quite a bit of things. Normally when regions were negotiating this on their own, they were using the plus level, and they were getting a nonprofit discount of $300 or $400. Oops, sorry, got to get rid of him. And so it was costing $1,200 or $1,300 a region for this plus level. We were able to negotiate a bundled group that we put with conference and with our institutes and all the regions in the ERSL that use guidebook. And so we've got that price at $1,000, and they upgrade us to the premium for all the events. So you can see all of these things that you can use through guidebook for evaluating presentation or the presenters during their sessions, to putting sponsorship opportunities and banners on your guidebook, pushing messages out. It's a really great service, and many regions are moving straight to this and not using so much of a printed program. We will follow up with additional information on all of these things, but I'm trying to give you an overview on the types of services that we provide. So at this point, are there any questions on what I've covered so far?
Okay, so Yvette asks, is it so it's $1,000 per event? That's
yes, so each region would be charged $1,000 for your regional conference each year.
Another question from Cornet, excuse me if I mispronounced. Will website process payments for registrations for each conference, and what are, okay. I think it's what is website process payments for registrations for each conference, and what is the percentage cost to process payments?
Well, we haven't got to registration yet. That's going to be the next level that we're going over, so let me get to that in a second. So those are the a number of services that are bundled together in our event services. And the big one that we hope is the most help to you is our registration module. We offer these registration services so that you as a conference host will be able to focus on the educational content, networking opportunities, and attendee experiences while leaving the administrative tasks of registration and financial management, paying your invoices and master billing to NIRSA headquarters. We start by collecting information from you on an Excel spreadsheet. This is something that I'll be sending out in the next couple weeks, and you will be prompted to provide information that's, you know, what your pricing levels are for all the different member types, early bird, post early bird, what your pre-con pricing is, what your pre-con descriptions are, the minimum and maximum attendance numbers if things have a limit, if you have a limit in your facility size or transportation, that you put that in the form, key dates of when your early bird is, when you want to open registration. We use all this information then to build out your online and PDF registration information. You can ask for t-shirt sizes, dietary restrictions, anything that is a checkbox or something that they complete on this form flows into a database that we'll go through in a minute. If someone's not a member of NIRSA and they register online, they just would need to create a profile and be able to process through like that. So there's no, it's all, again, connected to the NIRSA database, so members get the right pricing for their membership level. Generally, we recommend that you launch your registration for your event about 4 months prior to your conference. Often institutional budgets may not start until July, so they can't necessarily register people, you know, like in May. And history shows that the majority of members register closer to the early bird deadline. Often registrations will open in July and we don't get the first registrations until August, and then we get quite a few right at the deadline. It's also helpful to set solid deadlines so you aren't extending them and your attendees come to expect that. I know in Region 1, traditionally they would set the early bird about 2 months out. We recommend it's about 6 weeks out, because if it's too early, then you end up postponing and delaying it, and then they end up expecting that, and so they still don't register by the early bird deadline. So it's really important to set a realistic deadline and then stick to it. I mean, they can still come, and they're maybe only paying $25 more, but you need to get some catering things and some events figured out with your pre-conference workshop, so you need those numbers by those deadlines. And because we include the payment of invoices and bills with registration, you don't have to open registration early so you have enough income in the bank to pay your bills. We cover that difference, so it's easier for you to focus on your event. you'll have 24-hour access to your attendee list. And I'm going to kind of go through that. I'm sorry, John's showing me a question. Can you read it to me?
Oh, actually,
oh. So each regional host will get a link to a website that you can get your regional roster, and then each region has its own code. So I'm just going to pull up one from last year, and then you would hit the export to Excel, and this information that I send to the conference hosts, you can share with your registration lead, perhaps your sponsorship lead, if there's information in there that they need to have access to, or you can just pull that data and provide to them. So in this form is everything that maybe you have, like that was a checklist on your registration form. So community service project, dietary restrictions, some of these are pre-con events, main conference registration, t-shirt sizes, all of these things show up in the description. And then this total number is the number of people at a snapshot, or the number of registrations in that category. So it's an easy at-glance kind of thing to know that I have 25 people registered so far for my facility pre-con, and I need 30, so we want to make sure we beef up our marketing to get 5 more. You'll have their name, their title. I'm going to, hang on a minute, I'm going to freeze the screen so that we can scroll down to one of the, of course I always do that, not quite right. Apologize. To check down to something with members. So the other one was an associate member one. So you have their name, their title, their email, their institution. All of this is what's in the member database. So if it's missing or if it's incorrect, they need to go in and update their member profile so it's accurate information. The registration class and the member type. So here you can find out if they're a professional, if they're a student, if they're an associate, which is usually the most important thing for your events, to know that. The registration class is just they're a professional member from an institutional member or a student member from a non-institutional member. These codes don't change. These codes may change if they register in August and they're a member at the time of registration, and then right before your event their membership expires. It may change to professional non-member, which isn't going to affect you, but that's just, you know, so you can kind of track what's going on. This is the price of the event and what they paid for it and how many, and then the balance due, which is a very important thing for everybody to pay attention to. We expect the regions to be the ones following up with people that haven't paid their money. They may have registered with a purchase order or registered a number of people saying that a check's coming. You would want to follow up with them a week or two before your event to make sure that they take care of their balance due before they show up at the regional conference, and then expect to pay, because that's we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's harder to do, or that they expect to come and didn't know that they still had a balance due. And then there's additional information if, for example, I think up here we had the dietary restrictions, and it might have the ADA needs. If you have a presenter that is on crutches or in a wheelchair and your presentation room is a stage that doesn't have a ramp, you might need to know this additional information so you can follow up with those individuals to see what accommodations you might need to make, or talk to your hotel or your catering about making sure that they are providing vegan alternatives or gluten-free alternatives in the meals that you're catering. So we feel that this roster has a lot of information that you can use for a lot of things. It's what you use to print your name badges. It's what you use to confirm your numbers for your events and for your catering needs. And you can get into it anytime, so we think it's a very useful service.
I can answer.
Okay, we got some questions.
All right, the first question is from Mark. To clarify, once we fill in the Excel sheet with registration information and send it back, NIRSA will create the PDF and website registration page?
Yes, and we need to have everything 100% complete, because if you don't quite have your pre-cons figured out yet, or what the pricing is, or what the description is, we can't half do these registration forms. So everything has to be 100% complete, and then we'll create the PDF form and the online registration. We'll send it back for you to review to make sure that it looks right, that things are spelled right, the contact information is correct. We will test the online registration to make sure it's working for the different price points. And then we'll work with you to agree on a date that we launch registration, and we'll give you links to the online registration form and the PDF. You will load them up on now your NIRSA web page for registration, and they'll be able to click on that, and it'll be live, and you go from there and start tracking your attendees.
All right. And the second question is from Ryan. It looks like it's about sponsored registration. Is that about to? Yeah,
we'll get to sponsor registration here in a minute. That's a little bit different process.
So Ryan, if it doesn't get answered, we'll ask you again at that time.
Okay. So with the online with the registration module, we also pay all of your bills. So some of you, we've already paid deposits on your hotels and your meeting space, but now we're going to get into, you're going to be ordering your attendee giveaways, you're paying deposits on your invited speakers, you have some social space you need to confirm. All of these things, these bills start coming in. You just send them to me along with a W-9 form completed from the vendor. This is just their tax ID. I'll send blank forms out to everybody, and then we'll process the payment and get them taken care of. And so you don't have to wait for money to come in to start paying your bills. The master bill application is something that's really important with hotels, and because catering and AV are probably going to be some of your most expensive thing on your budget. So if we can get credit by filling out a credit application, and they basically look at NIRSA's application, and we put down hotels that we've used in the conference in the past, and they check our credit history, and then they approve us for a master bill, which generally means that we don't have to pay up front for your $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in catering estimates. They bill us after the event for, you know, all of that. So that's a good thing to have. We don't do that if we're not running registration for you, because we have to be the guarantee on that. And then the sponsor and exhibitor registration. This is, we manage this through a Google Doc, this process. We're still trying to figure out the best way to do this. And a Google Doc is one of the ways that we at least share information back and forth. So we create a document for each region based off of your sponsorship menu. So hopefully you can develop a sponsorship menu, provide it to us. We'll create this Google Doc that then we have access to, and you or your sponsorship or exhibitor committee people have access to. They will fill this out with who they're working with to recruit for sponsorship or exhibiting. And then when you get to the point of saying, okay, we've agreed to a sponsorship amount and they said they're good to go, then you let me know that we can invoice them. Rachel in our billing department will send them an invoice and put all that in the spreadsheet, and then when they pay, she'll track that too and say they're paid in full. And then you start tracking other information on here. And we can both be editing and working in this document. If you have people that part of their sponsorship is to get 2 people that get to come to conference and have an all-conference pass, their names go in here, and Rachel processes them through registration as complimentary, so they show up in your other rosters so that you can print name badges for them. We track certificate of insurance in here. So this is kind of our fix in the meantime, because everybody does their, not every region has an expo. The sponsorship packages are kind of different, and so we're still kind of working on this, but this has worked for the last 2 or 3 years. So we'll continue with this process and some additional information that we can collect. I'm going to go to a little more sponsorship stuff in a minute, but that's kind of how we do that. And most of that starts right now. I think we're already we'll be building out the Google Docs probably in the next couple of weeks, because sponsorship money seems to be the first money that comes in for regions. And so we want to make sure we're set up to track that information, and we're invoicing them and collecting that money for you. So speaking of sponsors and exhibitors, I'm just going to touch on this area lightly, because we had the session that we normally have at conference. We instead focused it on sponsors and exhibitors. And so they went through quite a bit of stuff at conference. And so we might have a follow-up webinar if we feel we haven't answered all those questions thoroughly. But one of the things that came out from that session was that the associate members really want regional planners to think about the connections the exhibitors like to have with attendees. It's quality over quantity, and if they can have a 2-hour unopposed block of time where they're meeting with directors or decision makers, is much more valuable to them than 2 days of contacts with a 15-minute break between ed sessions and people just kind of running by. So they've really encouraged you to look at your conference schedule and see if you can identify some unopposed time that can really be focused on the expo so that they're getting the biggest bang for their buck. A sponsorship menu, it's helpful for you to create one with what's included in all of that. Heidi Cleary here at the headquarters that works with our exhibitors and our sponsors would be happy to review that and suggest ideas for that. It's our associate members go to the majority of the regional events. Our members don't go to numerous regions, and so the associate members are the ones that recognize differences in pricing packages or what they get from region A versus region C and what they paid for that. So it might help to have another set of eyes and kind of saying that, well, you don't have quite as many people coming, or you don't have you have a lot of contacts here that you could maybe price this a little differently. So she'd be happy to review those with you. And then we build the Google Doc that we all have access to based off your sponsorship menu and what you're selling for your different levels of sponsorship and what's included in that, so that it's unique to you. The certificate of insurance, that is something that we started requiring a couple years ago. Most of the companies that are exhibiting with you, it's only for exhibitors, not for sponsors, but they know what that is. It's a certificate that names NIRSA as an additional insured and shows us that they have a level of insurance that meets our requirements. We will, when we invoice your different exhibitors, we will include that information on the invoice of what we need and what level and what they have to include on that certificate. And then we track it in the Google Doc when they send it in to us, and we'll say it's here, it's good through your conference, and it's good if Precor sends one into us and it has a proper language that covers all the events. It could be good for all the regionals and the conference depending on the dates that they have on their certificate. They're usually good for a year, and it kind of depends on when it's up for renewal. But those certificates will cover all the events that they may be attending. And we will send a sample when I start following up in the next couple weeks with information. I'll send you a sample of what it needs to look like. So did that answer the questions on sponsorship that someone had earlier?
So this is actually a sponsor registration related question. Ryan asks, how do we handle sponsors who receive complimentary registrations as part of their sponsorship packages?
So that would be on your sponsorship menu, and on the Google Doc, I'm going to go back here. And this is where you might say that we have built this out to say a gold sponsorship includes 2 free, 2 people get to come on that. So when you get over here to sponsor exhibitor attendees with full conference access, this is where you would record their names. When they first say they'll be a sponsor and we collect their money, this may be 6 months before the event, and they don't know who these people are. So as you get closer to your event, you're going to start following up with all your sponsors and exhibitors and saying, okay, who's coming, what are their names, and this is where you're going to load them up in the Google Doc. Rachel in our accounting department takes those names and registers them as a complimentary registration as an exhibitor with the all conference pass. We'll figure out what the different sections are so that they will show up in your roster and you can print name badges for them. You might have exhibitors that are exhibitors only and you don't want them to have access because it's a very minimal price that they paid just for the expo. So you may not even do name badges for them so that they then don't have access to anything else. Or you may do a different color name badge so you know how to restrict them. So this is how we manage that piece of the exhibitors and the sponsors. Are there any other questions on sponsorship? So where we are next, as I mentioned earlier, we are finalizing the pricing model with the member network, so all regions will have access to these bundled services. We should have that in the next week or two so that we can finalize all of these forms. When you go to the website, there's a whole nother section on the website for NIRSA event services, and this is all geared to last year's, so what services were offered and how to get them is, I still need to update all this information. That'll happen in the next couple weeks, but we can still get going on a number of things. But you can look through this page as well. I think the timeline thing is a very important thing to pay attention to. As someone asked earlier on the registration information, that you may send me that Excel sheet back, but if we're missing 2 or 3 things, I'm not going to get started on it. So when we say generally it takes 10 days for us to turn it around, the first draft, that's 10 days after we receive 100% of the completed information, not 10 days from when you send me the first draft that's incomplete. So this is a very helpful thing, and just you all know that your regions all occur in September, October, November, so there's lots of stuff coming in at the same time, and so this is just kind of a vague, not a vague, but a general idea of how long before you should be doing these things and how long you can expect for us to turn it around. Contracts take a long time. We might say the 15 days, well, that's for the first review, and then we have to wait for the hotel to make the edits and send it back, and then we review again. So it's not just this done in 15 days. That's the initial, each round, basically. So this is very helpful information to kind of look through. And I'll be following up with everybody in the next week or two with forms that you need to fill out so we can get going on processing your event. The last thing I want to say for future hosts, 2018 and beyond, if you don't yet have a site, you might have a city, maybe you know what region, but you don't know what city. We have a third-party meeting planner company that works with us that does our site selection, site RFP process for our conference, and they do it for regions as well. Region 6 used them this year in San Diego. Region 4 has used them for a couple years. They will send out an RFP. You sit down with them and tell them, you know, how many nights you want, how many meeting rooms you want, and what days, and your week's preference. And they will send out that RFP to a number of different cities or a number of different hotels in one city, and they will do the negotiating with the hotel. It doesn't cost you anything. It's helpful for us because Helms Briscoe knows what we need in our contracts, and so they write the contracts. There's very little back and forth that goes on with those. So it's a really great service if you're looking for sites and you need help with that. So just reach out to me and I'll give you Jamie's contact information and you can follow up with him to begin that process. So that wraps up my presentation on NIRSA Event Services. is just to kind of give you an overview of what's available. There's a lot of stuff I got to start sending out to everybody, and you can begin working with your regional reps on building out your websites with the content. They're ready to go, just waiting for that information. So are there any other questions that anybody has? All right, if not, thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful. I'll be following up with all of you in the coming weeks, and if you have questions in the meantime, then feel free to reach out to me. Thanks. Bye-bye.